Finger Edogawa Rampo. The patient awoke from the surgical anesthesia and looked at me. He had a thick bandage wrapped around his right hand, but little did he know that his wrist had been amputated. He was a well-known pianist, so the loss of his right wrist was a fatal wound. The murderer might have been a fellow pianist who was jealous of his fame. He was knocked unconscious by a passerby on a street in the dark after being slashed from the top of his right wrist joint with a sharp blade. Fortunately, it happened near my hospital, so he was brought to this hospital in a coma, and I treated him as best I could. Ah, you took care of him. Thank you. I got drunk, in a dark street, and some guy, I don't know who he was, got me. It's your right hand. I hope your fingers are okay. I'm fine. I got hit on the arm a little bit, but it will heal in time. I couldn't bear to disappoint my best friend and tried to keep the fact that his life as a pianist was over until he was a little better. I tried to keep it under wraps until he was a little better. Do your fingers work like they used to? I'm fine. I left the bed as if to escape. I told the nurse who was attending him not to tell anyone that his wrist was gone for the time being. About 2 hours later, I visited him in his room. The patient had regained some of his strength. However, he still did not have the strength to replace his right hand. He did not know that his wrist was gone. Does it hurt? I looked over at him and asked. Yes, it feels much better, he said. He looked at me. He looked at me and began to move the fingers of his left hand, which were on the blanket, as if he were playing the piano. I've composed a new piece of music, he said, and I need to play it once a day. I was then, on the spur of the moment, I thought of an idea and pressed my finger on the ulnar nerve in his upper arm, pretending that I was trying to keep the affected part of his arm still. I did this because pressure on the ulnar nerve would transmit the sensation of its presence to the central brain center, even though I did not have my finger there. He kept moving the fingers of his left hand on the blanket, as if they felt good, but then said, "Oh, my right fingers are fine." He was moving the fingers of his right hand on the blanket in a pleasant, deliberate manner. "Oh, my right finger is fine. It moves fine." He continued to play an imaginary piece of music. I couldn't bear to watch. I gave the nurse a look as if I was holding the patient's ulnar nerve in his right arm, then left the hospital room, stealing the sound of my footsteps. As I passed by the operating room, I saw a nurse standing there staring at a shelf attached to the wall of the room. Her appearance was unusual. Her face was pale, her eyes were unusually wide, and she was staring at something on the shelf. I involuntarily went into the operating room and looked at the shelf. There was a large glass bottle in which his wrist had been soaked in alcohol. At first glance, I couldn't move. In the alcohol, his wrist, or rather his 5 fingers, were moving like the legs of a white crab. They were moving in the same tone as a piano key being struck, but much smaller than they actually were, like an infant's, faltering, steady movements. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next installment.